Before we dive in, I'd like to ask a small favor. I'm pouring all my energy into reaching my goal of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to me. Please, I'm asking you to hit that subscribe button. It's just a single click, but it gives me tremendous motivation to keep creating more videos. Thank you so much.
The news arrived on Oakbarrow Street at noon, borne on the back of Tilbrook's cart. It had been embellished twice before reaching the village pump. Old Tilbrook, who conveyed the carrier's cart to Wembury on Tuesdays and returned with it on Thursdays, held a firm belief that news, much like eggs, soured if handled too delicately. "He's dead," he bellowed, his voice preceding the cart's arrival. 5 weeks dead. They buried him at Graywend on the 10th, and not a single bell was rung in this parish. No one inquired who. There was but one man in the entire county whose passing would be so boisterously announced from a cart. Louisa Mostyn stood at the pump, 2 empty cans in hand, with 9 other women ahead of her in line. She didn't turn. She had learned long ago that the surest way to glean every scrap of gossip in Oakbarrow was to feign preoccupation with something else. "And the new one's coming," Tilbrook added. "Wednesday or Thursday. Nephew. Never set foot in the place in his life." "They say he was a soldier," offered Mrs. Hadlow. "They say a great many things. I say he's coming because the house has had its chimneys swept, and no one sweeps a chimney for a man who isn't expected." The pump wheezed out a cupful of murky water, coughed, and fell silent. The woman working the handle muttered a curse beneath her breath, which in Oakbarrow that August was as close to a prayer as one could get. It hadn't rained since the 3rd week of June. Louisa had counted the days, as she counted most things. 58. Below the church, the brook had dwindled to a stony track with a mere thread of dampness down its center. The Skelbrook well had run dry at the end of July. The churchyard well was fouled, and the street pump, after yielding a meager 4 gallons at first light, sulked until evening. Every morning, carts rumbled down to the ford. The water they brought back was warm and gritty. The children drank it. The children fell ill. There was but one spring in the parish that, in living memory, had never failed. It emerged from the corner of the field the old Duke's men had christened the New Peace, nestled beneath a low thorn bank. And the parish had known it as the Lady Well since time immemorial. In the year 14, a ring fence had been erected around that very field. A gate had been affixed to the footpath, secured by a padlock. The parish had petitioned the vestry. The vestry, in turn, had approached the Duke's agent. The agent had explained, with irrefutable logic, that the land belonged to the Duke, and the water flowed upon it. That, in Oakmere, was the entirety of the law. It was 3 years old, and everyone had long since ceased to speak of it aloud. "There's more," Tilbrook announced, clearly relishing his role. "Commissioners convene at Wenbury on the 29th of next month. Final meeting. The awards are to be signed." That, at least, made her turn around. "The 29th of September, Louisa stated. "That's what the clerk's boy told me, Miss Mostyn. And he had it straight from the clerk, and after that, it can't be altered." "After that," Tilbrook declared, "it's the law of the land, same as the 10 Commandments, only harder to argue with." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Louisa remained unmoved. She stood there, can in each hand, and tackled the calculation she had been avoiding since spring. 42 days after the 29th of September, the lines on the enclosure map would cease to be mere lines and would become, in perpetuity, the very shape of the parish. Whose field, whose road, whose common, whose water. Everything her father had meticulously measured in 12, and everything that had since been done to his measurements, would be irrevocably fixed in a sealed award. She finally collected her 4 gallons at 12:30. Laden with them, the yokes digging into her shoulders, she began the trek home up the Wenbury road. Her thoughts turned to a hedge, standing stubbornly in the wrong place. Her cottage, a 2-room dwelling perched atop the hill, was rented from the parish for £4, of which she paid 3. The vestry generously forgave the 4th pound in exchange for the writing she did for them. When her father was alive, he had rented the house at the foot of the hill, the one with the good window, and had surveyed 3 parishes. Nathaniel Marston had been dead for 16 months. The good window had gone with him. Kit was on the doorstep, the surveyor's chain in hand. He was 11, or thereabouts, and no one could say for certain, as he had been left at the workhouse door in Wembury in '06, with nothing but a name pinned to his shirt. He possessed the whitest hair Louisa had ever seen on a living creature, and a memory like a steel trap. In the eyes of the parish, he was something far simpler. He was a 2 shilling and 3 pence weekly rate that everyone would gladly see settled elsewhere. He had the surveyor's chain stretched out along the path, meticulously following it link by link with a rag. "There's rust on the 9th handle," he announced. "There's rust on the 9th handle because you washed it. Dirt eats iron slowly. Water eats it fast." She set the cans down and pushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead with her wrist. "Leave it. We'll need it on Friday. For the vestry?" "For the vestry." He rolled the chain with practiced grace, hand over hand, coiling exactly 10 links into each loop, precisely as he had been taught. In 2 years, he had never once done anything by halves. Louisa watched him, a familiar thought surfacing, as it did most days. The parish would bind him as an apprentice to someone outside the county before he turned 12, and there was nothing in the world she could do to prevent it. She entered the cottage and went to the table beneath the window, unrolling the sheet. Her father's map of Oakmere, 4 feet by 3, rendered on fine paper, the parish laid out in his elegant, slender hand. Every furlong measured, the roads, the brook, the 7 bridges. The church stood at the center, its shadow meticulously drawn as if the sun had remained fixed in the sky since 12. In the top right corner, in ink a shade darker than the rest, was the signature, N. Marston, Surveyor. She had penned it herself in the April following his death, at that very table, with his own pen. The second half of the fee was payable upon delivery of the fare sheets. There were £2 and 9 shillings in the house, and a quarter's rent was overdue. It had taken her 4 attempts. The 4th rendition was so flawless that she had sat, her hands flat on the table on either side of it, and gazed at it for a long time, feeling utterly cold. She had drawn every single line. She had held the far end of the chain from the age of 9, and the near end from the age of 15. She had learned bearings before she had learned to hem a handkerchief. Her mother had died. Her father needed a chainman, and he had a daughter instead of a son. With the practical charity that formed the entirety of his faith, he had decided this would suffice. She could run a traverse across broken ground and close it within a link. She had surveyed 2/3 of the parish of Oakmere with her own hands, and the map bore the inscription N. Marston, Surveyor, because that was the only name the world would pay for. Louisa placed her finger on the new piece. The new piece comprised 52 acres of prime grazing land on the eastern edge, situated between the Duke's Park wall and the parish common. Her father had measured its western hedge in 12. The hedge stood 14 chains from the mere stone at the corner of Ladywell Field, and she remembered it because they had booked it twice, the light fading, her father cold and impatient, and she had been eager for her supper. 14 chains. In March, she had walked the same line for the vestry with the same chain. And the hedge now stood at 22. 8 chains, 176 yards of oak marrow shifted sideways in the night, by no one, in a country where hedges do not walk, and within those 8 chains, precisely, lay the corner of thorn where the lady well emerged from the ground. She had gone to the agent about it in April. Mr. Cawthorne had been exceedingly kind. He had offered her a chair, something no one at Graywend had ever done. He had listened to her patiently, his head tilted slightly. Then he had uttered the words that still echoed in her mind at 4 in the morning. "Your father was a fine old man, Miss Marston, and his eyes were failing for 2 years before the end, and there is no sense in either of us saying so out loud." He had then paid her 8 shillings for the vestry work. "If she desires more of this," he had added, with a smile that suited his pleasant face, "she would be wise to be careful what she says about a dead man's chain work. A surveyor's name is all a surveyor has." He had managed Graywend for 22 years, for a duke who was ill, then for a duke who was dying, and now for a duke who did not yet exist. Louisa rolled up the map. She returned the compass to her pocket, where it resided. Her father's plain brass pocket compass, its glass scratched, its needle still true, the case worn, the silver bright along one edge, from 30 years of a thumb. 42 days. She said nothing to Kit about any of it, and at 4 o'clock, she went out with the cans to fetch the evening water from the ford. She never reached the ford. There were 3 of them at the parish bound that afternoon. They sat in the white dust beneath the wall, where the Wenbury road crested the hill. A 4th man leaned against the bound stone itself. A crowd from Oakmere stood at a respectful distance from all 4, much as people stand back from a fire. It had been a summer for vagrants. The harvest had failed in the north. Soldiers had been returning home off the pay list for 2 years, and the roads that August teemed with men walking somewhere else. The parish had developed a settled method for dealing with them. Constable Winnick would escort them to the bound. They were then directed over the line into the next parish, and the next parish, in turn, would push them over its own boundary. And so it continued, all the way to wherever a man was headed, or wherever he eventually stopped. It wasn't cruelty, precisely. That was the part Louisa could never explain to Kit. If you offer relief to a stranger, the parish that does so may find him settling upon it. And a settled man represents a financial burden on every householder in Oakmere, forever. Water was not given, for water is the beginning of bread. The men were pointed towards the road, and told the distance to Wenbury, which was 6 miles, and they were told this kindly, and by people who were frightened. 3 of the 4 men rose and departed. The 4th did not. He sat on the ground, his back against the bound stone, his legs stretched out before him. And the first thing Louisa noticed were his boots. They were good boots, which was the wrong thing for a man on that road to possess. They were town boots, hand-sewn, and one of them was tied with hay cord where the lace had broken. The rest of him was what the road makes. He had no hat. His hair was fair, and the sun had burned his neck raw. His coat was a gentleman's coat that had clearly slept in a ditch. The shoulder seam was out, and down the front of it was a rusty stain that Louisa took for blood. She would learn later that it was iron water from a cattle trough. His lips were split. He was perhaps 30, and he was remarkably still. "On your feet," Constable Winnick commanded. He had already said it twice. The man turned his head and looked at the constable, and Louisa saw his eyes. They were a cool, light gray, and she thought, "He's not going to get up because he cannot." The man spoke. His voice cut through the crowd like cold water down a drain. It was not a beggar's voice. It was quiet, level, and came from the front of his mouth. Every servant and every carter on that road recognized it in an instant. They didn't believe it. They resented him for it. "You'll sit in Wenbury lockup if you sit anywhere," Winnick said. "Very probably. Are you drunk?" "No." "What are you then?" The man appeared to ponder this. "Thirsty," he said. Someone laughed. One of those laughs with an edge of shame. Winnick's face darkened. Louisa knew Winnick. He was a wheelwright with a bad hip. He wanted no part of this. And a man who is ashamed of what he is doing will do it with greater force. "Water," the man said. "That is all. Then I'll go on." He said it to no one in particular, the way a man says something he has already repeated several times. There were 4 full cans in that road. Louisa counted them without conscious effort. Mrs. Hadlow had 2. The Smith boy had 1 on a yoke. A bucket stood by the wall, still bearing the sheen of the ford. No one moved. "Give him none," the overseer commanded. "Once you give, he's ours." "He is not ours," Louisa countered. She hadn't intended to speak. The words had simply flowed from her, level and clear, in the voice she used for reading the vestry minutes aloud. The entire road turned to look at her. "He's nobody's, Mr. Ilbert," she said. "He's a man sitting on a stone. If half a pint of water settles a man on a parish, then I have settled half the county on Ockmer this summer. So has everybody here. We may as well all go into the house together at Michaelmas. Miss Marston, it's my water. I fetched it up from the ford at 6 o'clock this morning, and I shall give it to whom I like." She walked out of the crowd into the space that had opened around the stone. She set the can down and unhooked the tin cup from the handle where it always hung, her father's cup, dented in the side. It had stood in a hedge in every parish within 9 miles of Wenbury. She filled it and held it out. The man looked at the cup, then up at her. Later, she could never account for what happened in that half a second. It was not a romantic thing. He was filthy and cracked, and he stank of ditches. She was a woman of 23, with a yoke mark on both shoulders and ink under her thumbnail. But something behind his face came up to the surface and looked out at her, and it was not gratitude. It was something closer to arithmetic, as though he had been going along all day adding up a column, and here at last was a figure that did not fit. "Thank you," he said. He drank it in 3 swallows. His hand shook, and he did not try to hide that it shook, which she thought afterwards was the beginning of everything. She filled it again. He drank that more slowly. "Again," she said, "but slower, or you'll be ill." "I know." The 3rd cup he took his time over. The crowd began in 1s and 2s to remember business elsewhere. It is not interesting to watch a man drink water. It is only interesting to watch a man be refused. "How far to the next water on this road?" he asked. 6 miles to Wenbury. The ford's dry above the church. There's a spring at the bottom of the 2nd field, past the milestone. But you'll not find it without being told. "Then tell me." Louisa crouched down on her heels beside the stone, and with one finger she drew oak marrow in the dust. "This is the road. This is the milestone here. You'll come to a gate on your left, with a broken top bar. Don't take the path over the hill. Whatever anybody tells you, it dies in a thorn bank." Her finger went on. "Through the gate, down the headland. And where the ground goes soft under the ash trees, there's a stone trough sunk in the bank. It's clean. It runs all summer." "How do you know?" "I measured it," she said. 7 chains from the gate to the trough, and it's a fall of about 9 feet. He was quiet for a moment. "You measured it," he said. "My father surveyed this parish." She stood up and knocked the dust off her palm. "The trough's marked on the sheet. Most things are." He was looking at her hands. She saw him do it, and she knew what he was reading there. Her hands were the one part of her that had never once passed for a lady's. The ink, the sunburn, the hard band of callus across the base of the right-hand fingers, which comes of one thing only: dragging a 100-link chain out of wet grass 10,000 times. "You hold the chain yourself," he said. Nobody had ever said that to her in her life, in that tone, as a fact, with no laugh at the end of it. "I do," Louisa said. "What's your name?" "Louisa Marston." He got himself up off the ground then, in stages, using the stone. Standing, he was tall, taller than she had allowed for, and he stood the way tired men stand who have been taught to stand. He gave her back the cup with both hands, which was absurd and correct. "Rathmel," he said. "Well, Mr. Rathmel, the gate with the broken bar, left then down." He put out his hand towards the road ahead, and then let it fall, as if he had meant to ask something else, and thought better of it. "Miss Marston, why did I what? Everyone else here has water." Louisa hooked the cup back on the can handle. "Because I was thirsty once," she said. "On a hot day, at 14, 3 miles from home, with a broken chain, a woman I did not know came out of a house and gave me a drink. She would not be thanked for it. She hooked her thumb under the yoke. That is all it is. It is a cup of water. It costs nothing." She picked up the can and went past him down the hill, and did not look back, because the whole of Auchmarrow was watching. Behind her, the man who had told her his name was Rathmel stood in the road a while, looking at the dust map at his feet. Then he walked east, towards the milestone, at the pace of a man with 6 miles in him, and no more. 2 miles on, he found the gate, with the broken bar. He went through it, and down the headland, and the ground went soft under the ash trees, exactly where she had said. And there was the trough, sunk in the bank, clean, running. He knelt in the mud and drank for a long time. Then he sat back against the bank with his eyes shut. He had been 4 days on the road. He had wanted to see the last 12 miles slowly on his own feet. On Sunday night, the fever had come. His purse had gone from his coat, while he slept in a barn. Then he had discovered, with the blank astonishment of a man learning that fire is hot, that a gentleman with a torn sleeve and no money is not a gentleman at all. He was simply a shape on a road that householders would like to see the back of. 4 days. In 4 days, He had been refused water 11 times. He had counted, because counting was what was left. In his coat, sewn inside the lining, where it had not been worth a thief's time to look, was a letter from his uncle's land agent. The estate is in good order. The tenants are content. The enclosure of the parish of Oak Marrow proceeds, and will be completed at Michaelmas, greatly to the improvement of the property. There is nothing at Graywend that requires your grace's attention before the winter. Aldous, 9th Duke of Wycliffe, sat in the mud with his hands on his knees and thought about a woman crouching in the dust to draw him a map of water. He would be at his own gates by 9 o'clock that night. Nothing there required his attention before the winter. The note came up the hill at 8 o'clock the next morning, carried by a garden boy who had run all the way and wanted it known. It was from Mr. Cawthorne, and it was 3 lines long, and it asked Miss Marston to attend at Graywend at 10 o'clock, with her late father's sheets of the parish, the commissioners having required a fair copy before the final meeting. There was no question in it anywhere. There never was. Louisa washed her hands twice, which did nothing. Then she put on the gray stuff gown that had been her mother's. It had been turned once, dyed once, and it was still the best thing she owned. She walked the 3 miles with the roll under her arm and the compass in her pocket. She was at the lodge gates at 9:45, because she had never in her life been late for a man who could pay her. Graywend sits in a fold of ground, with its back to the hill, so that you do not see it until you are almost in it. Then the drive turns, and the house is simply there, long, gray, low, with a cedar older than the family. Louisa had been inside it 4 times, always on business, always standing. Mrs. Barrowby took her through to the hall and left her by the table. 10 o'clock came and went. Louisa stood with the map under her arm and looked at the pattern of the stone floor. At 20 past, a woman came out of the drawing-room door with a stick in her hand and stopped dead in the middle of the hall. She was 70 or thereabouts, small, upright, dressed in the black of 10 years back, with a face like a closed fist and eyes that took an inventory of you before you had finished curtsying. "Who is this?" she said to nobody. "Marston, my lady." "Louisa Marston." "Marston." The old woman came 3 steps nearer. "You are Nathaniel Marston's girl. He surveyed the water meadow for my brother in the year 6, and told him to his face that the weir was built wrong. Nobody had told my brother anything to his face for 19 years. She looked at the roll under Louisa's arm. "Why are you standing?" "I was not offered a chair, my lady." "No," said Lady Eustacia Burrage. "You would not be." She looked around the empty hall as though the chairs had personally offended her, and then she pointed with the stick at the long oak settle by the wall. "Sit on that. If Cawthorne asks, tell him I put you there, and watch his face while you say it." She went out through the garden door without waiting for thanks. Louisa sat. It made no difference to anything at all, and she found her eyes stinging, which was ridiculous, and she was still angry with herself about it when the door of the west passage opened, and 2 men came through. The first was Cawthorne, with a folder under his arm, talking. The second was a tall man in a plain dark coat, shaved, brushed, his fair hair cut close at the sides, walking slowly because the man beside him was 60 and talking. He had a cut healing across the bridge of his nose. His boots were new. Louisa stood up. She knew him first by the way he stood before her. Mind would allow the rest of it. Then he lifted his head and looked across the hall at her, and his eyes were a cool light gray, and she felt the floor of the world go down 2 inches. "Miss Marston," he said. Cawthorne stopped talking. His head turned, and for 1 clean second, he looked at Louisa with an expression she would spend a good deal of the autumn thinking about, because it was not surprise. It was calculation interrupted. "Your Grace," Louisa said, and curtsied. "You have my map," he said. "I have my father's map, Your Grace." "Yes." He came a little further into the hall. He did not, she noticed, come near enough to make her step back. "Mr. Cawthorne, I shall want the small parlor in half an hour. Miss Marston, will you come in?" The small parlor looked over the drought-burnt lawn and had a table in it with nothing on the table. Louisa put the roll down and did not unroll it. The Duke shut the door himself, which servants hate, and stood on the other side of the table with his hands behind his back. You are going to say something, he said. Say it. It is not my place, your grace. That is the second thing you are going to say. Say the first. Louisa lifted her chin. Did you know who I was? No. Did you know who you were? Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile, and it was not anywhere near one. Yes. Then you sat against a stone in my parish, and let 11 people refuse you water, and let one give it. And you knew all the time that you owned the ground they were standing on. Her voice did not rise. That was the thing about Louisa Marston that people found difficult. You gave me a name. I gave you my name. Rathmel is my family name. It is on my christening entry, and it will be on my coffin. It was not the name that would have got you a bed and a doctor at the Wycliffe Arms. No, he said, it was not. Then you did not lie to me. She heard her own voice go dry and careful. You let me make a fool of myself, which is cheaper than lying and lasts longer. I gave charity to a duke. There is not a house in Auchmarrow that will stop laughing about it before Christmas. He was quiet for a moment. He had a way of being quiet that was not the same as having nothing to say. I did not intend to be found sitting on a stone. I intended to walk 12 miles and look at my own land with nobody's hand on my elbow. Then I was ill, and my purse was taken, and by Thursday I could not have told you my own name in a way that anybody would have believed. He looked down at the table. I was refused water 11 times. You are right that I counted. I had a great deal of leisure for counting, and the 12th time you'd given it, and you thought how very interesting. No, the word came out with an edge, the first she had heard from him. I thought I had been on this land 4 days and I had learned more about it than my agent had told me in 3 years. That is what I thought. I am not a fool, Miss Marston, whatever else I am, and I did not come here to play at beggars for my own amusement. Louisa said nothing. Say the rest, he said. You came in here with something else in your mouth. I would rather have it now than in a letter. So she untied the tape and unrolled her father's map on the table between them and put her finger on the new piece. This hedge is in the wrong place, she said. It stands 8 chains east of where it stood when this survey was made. That is 176 yards over a length of half a mile, and it takes in 52 acres of what was the parish common. It also takes in the only spring in Oakmere that has water in it in August. There is a padlock on the gate. 340 people are drinking out of a dry ford. He looked at the map for a long time. He did not touch it. You are telling me my agent has moved a hedge. I am telling you where the hedge is. I have not said who moved it. I do not know who moved it. Louisa put her hands flat on the table, which was what she did instead of shaking. I said this to Mr. Cawthorne in April. He told me that my father's eyes had been failing for 2 years before he died, and that a surveyor's name is all a surveyor has, and then he paid me 8 shillings. And were your father's eyes failing? His eyes were as good as mine on the day he died. She met the grey ones straight, and I held the far end of the chain on that line myself, your grace. In the October of the year 12, with my own 2 hands in the rain twice because he made me book it twice. 14 chains. I was 15 years old, and I wanted my supper, and I have never forgotten it. 6 days, the Duke said at last. Your Grace, you wrote to Cawthorne that the fair copy would take 6 days. It is in his folder. I read the letters this morning, all of them, which is more than my uncle did in 15 years. He straightened. I do not want a fair copy. I want the line run again. Every chain of it from the corner of Ladywell Field to the park wall, booked in the field and closed properly, so that when I put it in front of a man in a wig, he cannot laugh at it. Can you do that? Louisa's heart went hard and quick, and she kept her face entirely still. Yes. How long? 9 days if the weather holds. 12, if it breaks. I shall want a chainman, and I shall want somebody who is not afraid of Mr. Cawthorne. And in this parish, that is a shorter list than you would think. He nodded once. Terms. And here it was. Louisa had thought about this on the walk down without ever letting herself believe in it. And she had the words ready. 3 things. 2 guineas for the survey, paid whatever it shows. Because if you pay me by the answer, you will get the answer you paid for. She held up a second finger. The boy who carries my chain is Kit, 11 years old, on the parish books at 2 and 3 pence a week. He is to be paid a shilling a day by you in his own name. The vestry is to be told that he is in employment. A boy in employment is not bound apprentice to a chimney master in Wolverhampton at Michaelmas. The Duke did not move. And the third? Take the padlock off the Ladywell until it rains. That is the third thing you ask? Not the first? It is the third thing because it is the only one you can do today, Louisa said. The other two require you to remember them for a month. The corner of his mouth again. It stayed a shade longer this time. Agreed. All three. Anything else? No, you have not asked to be paid what the work is worth. 2 guineas is a fortnight's labor for a man in a wig and a morning's for a bad one. It is what my father charged. Your father is not doing it. He said it without cruelty. As a fact, the way he had said you hold the chain yourself in the road. When the sheet is drawn, whose name goes on it? Louisa looked at the map at the top right corner, at the thin, dark signature she had copied 4 times before she got it right. His, she said. A woman's name on a survey is worth nothing to any commissioner in England. It would be the first thing they threw at it. That is not an answer to what it is worth. It is an answer to what they will allow. Yes, she said. Most things are, Your Grace. He walked her to the door of the small parlor and opened it and stood aside for her, exactly as if she had come in a carriage. Miss Marston, Your Grace. He kept his hand on the door, the cup. It had a dent beaten into the side and a mark in the tin like a T lying down. I looked at it for 3 days and could not think why until this morning. Louisa's throat closed for a second. It is a brand, she said, for marking pegs. He heated it in the fire, and it slipped. Yes, said the Duke of Wycliffe. That was what I thought. The padlock came off the Lady Wellgate at 6 the next morning. Hawthorne sent 2 men to do it, which meant that by 7 o'clock the whole parish knew, and by 7:30 there were 19 people in the lane, with cans and buckets and a barrel on a cart. The spring came up cold out of the thorn bank as it had come up all summer for nobody. And the water went into the buckets, and the buckets went up the hill. Louisa stood on the bank with Kit and watched them. They're saying it was you, Kit said. They can say what they like. Mrs. Hadlow's saying it, and Mrs. Hadlow wouldn't give a dog the smell of a bone. He wiped his nose on his wrist. She says it's a wonder what some can get by making eyes at a gentleman. Does she? I told her a chain's 22 yards and she wouldn't know one end of it if it bit her. Kit, she wouldn't. The truth was in there somewhere, and it would not be got out again in her lifetime. She'd given a man water because he was thirsty. The parish had its well back because of it. Both those facts would be told for 30 years as a story about a girl who had been lucky in the road. She found she minded less than she expected. There was a chain to run. 5:30 tomorrow, she said. Bring the arrows. Count them before you leave the house and count them again in the field. And if you lose one, I shall know because I always know. Yes, miss. And Kit. Whatever anybody says to you in the next fortnight about me, or about the Duke, or about your mother, you say nothing back. Nothing at all. You look at them, and you wait. It drives people mad, and it costs nothing. He considered this with great seriousness. Is that what you do? It is what I have done since I was younger than you, said Louisa, and I am still here. They began the line at 5:30 on the Friday, in a mist that burned off by 7, and left the day white and hard. A survey is not a romantic business. It is arithmetic, done with your feet. Louisa set the plane table on the corner of Ladywell Field, with the compass laid on the board, and took her bearings while the light was still low. Then she walked the hedge with Kit dragging the chain behind her. Every 22 yards, a brass arrow went into the ground, came out again, and was counted. 100 links to a chain. Each link a shade under 8 inches, and the whole of England measured in nothing else. She booked every line in the Greenfield book in her own small hand. Bearing, distance, offset. She wrote what was there and not what she wanted. Her father had beaten that into her before she was 10, in the only way he ever beat anything into anybody. By asking her at supper what she had written and why. On the second morning, the Duke of Wycliffe came down the headland in an old coat, with his hands in his pockets, and asked if he might carry something. You may carry the far end of the chain, Louisa said without looking up from the book. Kit's arms are giving out, and he will not say so. They are not, said Kit. Why? They are. Take the arrows. So, the 9th Duke of Wycliffe walked the east hedge of his own estate for 2 hours with 100 links of iron over his shoulder. A woman of 23 told him he was 6 inches off the line and to move it. And he moved it 7 times without a word of complaint. Cawthorne watched the first half hour from the gate on a gray cob, then rode away and did not come back that day. Does it matter? The Duke asked. 6 inches in half a mile? 6 inches in half a mile is nothing. 6 inches taken all ways to the same side 40 times is 30 feet. Louisa read the vernier and wrote, "That is how it is done when it is done not by a great theft, but by a small one, repeated by a man who knows that nobody will ever walk it twice. You are walking it twice. I'm walking it the 3rd time," she said. "My father walked it first. They stopped at 2, under the ash trees by the trough. The water still came out of the bank there, as it had for him on the road. Kit ate his bread, and half of Louisa's, and fell asleep against the trunk with his mouth open. He is a good boy," the Duke said. "He is a boy the parish would like to sell to a chimney master for £4 and a suit of clothes." Louisa brushed the crumbs off her lap. "You should know what you have paid a shilling a day for. He can read anything you put in front of him. He can add 3 columns in his head, and he has never once in 2 years lost me an arrow. He has no family, no settlement anybody will admit to, and no protection beyond the fact that I make a noise about him. That is why he does not say his arms are giving out." The Duke looked at the sleeping boy for a while. "When I was 11, he said, I had a tutor, 2 hunters, a boat on the lake, and a mother who wrote to me twice a week from Naples. I have been telling myself since June that I am a serious man. I begin to think I have only been an expensive one." Louisa said nothing to that. There is nothing to say to it that is not either a lie or a cruelty. On the 3rd day they came to the place. It was where the new piece hedge ran up to the old headland, and Louisa had been dreading it and wanting it since April. The line of the hedge did not agree with the line of the ground. The ridges of the old ploughing under the turf ran on for 8 chains past the hedge and stopped in the middle of the field at nothing. Land remembers, turf grows over a bank, but the shape of the bank is still under it, and a low September sun will show you 60 years of history in about 4 minutes. "Stand there," she told the Duke. "Now walk towards me slowly, and tell me when the ground goes down under your feet." He walked and stopped and looked at the grass. "Yeah, that is where the hedge was. There is nothing here. There is a bank here 2 feet high, with 60 years of leaf mold on it. Look along it, not at it." She pointed with the compass. "It runs from that thorn to the corner of the wood. It is dead straight, and no plow made it." Kit was already 20 yards off, standing on one leg, looking pleased with himself. "There's the humpy stone," he said. Louisa turned. "The what?" "The humpy stone in the bank. We used to sit on it when we came for the nuts. Only Tom Winnock fell off it and said it was cursed, and after that we sat on the date." He scuffed the grass with his shoe. "It's a stone with a cross in it. It's face down now. They put the bank on top of it." There was a silence of the kind that changes a season. "Kit," said Louisa carefully, "how long have you known that stone was there?" "Always. And why did you never tell me?" Kit looked at her with the plain surprise of a child asked why he never mentioned the sky. "You never asked me about stones," he said. "You asked me about arrows." The county paper came up on Tilbrook's cart on the Thursday following, and Louisa read it standing in the street with her hands still black from the survey. It was in the 2nd column between the bankruptcy and a sale of timber. "A marriage is arranged and will shortly take place between His Grace, the Duke of Wycliffe of Greywind in this county, and Antonia, only daughter of Sir Adam Pentridge, Bart, of Chelmarsh." She read it twice. Then she folded the paper along its own crease, gave it back to Tilbrook, thanked him, and walked up the hill with her ears roaring. It was nothing. She had run a hedge line with a man for 3 days. He had carried her chain and eaten her bacon. She had allowed something to start in her chest that had no business being there. Now, here it was in print, in the 2nd column between a bankruptcy and a sale of timber. That was exactly where such things belong. She got in, shut the door, sat down at the table, and opened the field book at the day's page. Bearing 91 degrees 20, chains 3, links 42. Bank dead straight, height tuft, running NNE. She wrote for an hour. It was the only thing she had ever found that worked. At Graywend, 3 miles away, the Duke read the same paragraph at 9 o'clock and stood up so fast that his chair went over backwards. He had written to Sir Adam Pentridge on the 11th of July. It said in 4 lines that he was sensible of the honor. It said that he understood there had been conversations between Sir Adam and his late uncle, that he had not been party to them, and that he must decline. He had had a reply on the 15th. It had been 8 pages and warm. It had contained a form of words. We shall none of us speak of it again until you are settled at Graywend and can judge for yourself. He had put it away and thought the matter closed. He was 31 years old, and in all that time, nobody had ever gone ahead and done a thing to him after he had said no to it. He rang for a horse. Then he stood in the middle of his uncle's study with the bell rope still in his hand and did the sum that every man in his position has to do sooner or later. If he wrote to the paper contradicting it, the paragraph would be read in every house in the county by Saturday. The Duke publicly denies. Antonia Pentridge would be a woman who had announced a marriage that did not exist. That is not an embarrassment in that county, in that year. It is the end. The doors open to her at Christmas would be shut in the spring. Everybody would be very kind about it, and the kindness would finish her. If he said nothing, he was engaged. He put the bell rope down. 12 miles away at Chelmarsh, Antonia Pentridge sat at the end of her mother's bed and read the same paragraph aloud in a steady voice. Her hands shook so much that she had to lay the paper flat on the counterpane to finish it. It had cost her 4 shillings and a lie to a servant to get it into the paper. She had written it out herself at midnight in the form of words she had learned by heart out of other people's announcements. And she had told the groom it came from her father. She was 24. Chelmarsh had 1,200 acres, of which 1,000 were mortgaged, and a house with a hole in the roof over the west stairs that had been covered with a tarpaulin since the year 15. Her father had sold the townhouse, the pictures, and finally the pew. Her mother had not been out of that room since March. And the old Duke of Wycliffe had promised, not in law, not in writing, but at his own table in the December before he died, with his hand on her father's sleeve, the boy will do as he is told, and your girl shall have Graywend. Then the two shall be one property, as they should have been in my grandfather's time. The boy had not done as he was told. The boy had written 4 polite lines in July and closed the door. Antonia had read those 4 lines in her father's study standing up. She had understood in about 10 seconds that nobody was coming to save Chelmarsh. If a thing were printed and read and believed by enough people, it would become true. That is how nearly everything in her world had always worked. She was not a stupid woman. She had thought about it for 3 weeks before she did it, and she had been sick afterwards in the yard, behind the dairy, when nobody would see. He will be angry, her mother said from the pillows. Yes. And then he will be a gentleman, said Antonia, which is a great deal more reliable than being angry. She rode over to Graywend on the Saturday with a basket of hothouse grapes from a hothouse that no longer had glass in half its frames. She did not find the Duke, who was out. She found instead in the field beyond the park wall a woman in a gray gown kneeling in the stubble with a brass instrument on a tripod and a white-haired boy beside her holding a pole. Antonia got down from her horse and picked her way along the headland to see. "How very industrious!" Antonia said. Louisa stood up. She was aware in the order in which one is always aware of these things, of the mud on her hem, the sunburn across her nose, the loose hair and the ink. The woman on the headland wore a riding habit the color of claret cut, for her body by somebody who had measured it. "Miss Pentridge, you have the advantage of me." Louisa Marston. "My father surveyed this parish." "Ah, Marston." Antonia's smile arrived and settled, and was entirely charming. "You were the young woman who gave his grace a drink of water in the road. I have heard the story 4 times this week." She looked at the plain table with real curiosity. "And now he has set you to measuring things. I congratulate you on the well, by the way. My father's tenants at Fetterby are drinking out of a horse pond, but then we have no gallant young ladies in our lanes. The well was not my doing. No? The parish says otherwise. The parish says you asked him for it on your knees in the hall at Gravewend. The smile did not move at all. I do not believe that part. You do not look to me like a woman who kneels. That is meant kindly. Louisa said nothing. She looked at Antonia Pentridge and waited, which is what she had told Kit to do. And it works. Miss Marston, Antonia said at last, you will have seen the paper. I have. Then you will understand that in 6 months this will be my hedge, my well, and my boy carrying that pole. She gathered her skirt out of the stubble. I have nothing against you. I want you to know that because you will hear later that I had. I am very tired, and my mother is ill, and I mean to be mistress of this place, and I have no time at all for pretty stories. Good morning. She went back along the headland to her horse, and rode away with her back perfectly straight. It was only in the lane, out of sight, that she stopped. She put her hand over her mouth and stayed like that for the better part of a minute. The scandal broke on the Tuesday, and it broke, as they nearly always do, on somebody with no money. Damaris Hadlow was 19, and she was the eldest girl of the Mrs. Hadlow, who fetched water at the pump and had not spoken well of Louisa Marston since June. She had been under housemaid at Graywend for 2 years. She was dismissed at 8 o'clock in the morning without a character, her box put out on the gravel. She had been seen at the ice house door at 10:30 o'clock at night with a man. Louisa heard it at 10 o'clock from Damaris herself, who came up the hill with her box on a handcart and her face the color of paper. She got as far as the gate and then could not speak at all. The truth took an hour to get out of her in pieces at the table, with Kit sent outside. There had been men sleeping in the ice house since July. Not the same men, the ones off the road, the ones walked to the bound by Constable Winnick. They came back over the fields after dark because the ice house at Graywend has a dry floor and a door that does not lock. Damaris had been leaving the end of a loaf and a jug of small beer inside the door 3 nights a week since the beginning of August, because Louisa had asked her to. I told you to be careful, Louisa said. Her voice came out strange. I was careful. I was that careful, miss. Only Mr. Cawthorne's been having the yards watched since the Duke came. On account of the timber. Sunday night there was a man come for the bread while I was there. He took his hat off to me, and Watkins saw us from the arch. Damaris pressed her sleeve against her eyes. He never touched me. He never so much as... He took his hat off, miss. He said, God bless you. He was 50, if he was a day. What did you tell Mr. Cawthorne? Nothing. A pause. I couldn't tell him it was you as sent the bread, could I? He'd have had you off the survey by dinner. There it was. Louisa sat very still at her own table, with her palms pressed to the wood, and understood the exact shape of the thing that had happened. Damaris Hadler, 19. No money, no character, a mother and 4 brothers in a cottage at the bottom of Oak Barrow Street, had been ruined this morning. She had been ruined because Louisa Marston wanted to feed men on the road, and did not want to be seen doing it herself. Put your bonnet on, she said. Miss, we are going to Graywend. Both of us. Now. And you are going to say every word of that in front of Mr. Cawthorne and the Duke, including my name. And you are going to say it looking straight at them. And if your voice shakes, it does not matter in the least. Damaris stared at her. They won't believe me. They will believe me, said Louisa. And that is the only thing my situation has ever been worth. Bonnet. It went the way she had expected, and then a good deal further than that. Cawthorne heard them out in the steward's room, with his fingers together and his head tipped over towards his shoulder, exactly as it had been tipped in April. When they had finished, he said that he was sure Miss Marston believed what she was saying. A soft heart did great credit to a young woman. Unfortunately, the girl had been seen. Gravend could not employ a housemaid who admitted to opening a door at night, whatever the reason given afterwards. Whatever the reason given afterwards. He set it down in the room, like a man laying a card face up. You are saying she has invented it, Louisa said. I am saying nothing whatever, Miss Marston. I am saying that a great house has 40 servants and 109 keys, and that discipline is not a matter of intentions. He looked at her over his fingers kindly. You have been 3 days in the fields with His Grace. You will forgive me for observing that the parish talks about that too. The Duke, when it came before him at 4 o'clock that afternoon, reinstated Damaris Hadlow within 90 seconds. He doubled the food at the ice house door and ordered it put out openly by the kitchen at 9 o'clock every night. That shocked his household a great deal more than the scandal had. Mrs. Hadlow was at the pump the next morning when Louisa came down with the cans. She did not say thank you. She simply stood aside from the handle and worked it herself, and filled both cans to the brim while she looked steadily at the wall. Then she took up her own and went off up the hill without a word. It was the whole of the apology she had in her, and Louisa took it as one. It did not help. That is the part Louisa had not foreseen. By the Friday, the story in Auchmarrow had gone round twice and come back polished. In the first version, a housemaid had been caught with a sauve, and the new Duke had put her back to please the Marston girl. In the second, the Marston girl herself had been going down to the ice house at night. In the third, the Marston girl gave water to men in the road, and there was a word for women who did that. That version reached Louisa on the Sunday, out of the mouth of a 9-year-old, singing it in the lane. None of it came from Antonia Pentridge. Louisa was careful about that afterwards in her own mind, because it would have been easier if it had. Antonia had merely been asked at 2 tea tables whether she had heard the story, and had said both times with warmth, "I am sure there is nothing in it. She is a very capable young woman, and I will not hear a word against her. There is no defense against that. There has never been one." The note from the Dower House arrived on Monday, penned in a hand like barbed wire. "Miss Marston, come at 4 o'clock. Do not dress. E. Burridge." The Dower House at Graywend stands at the end of the Lime Avenue. Louisa was received in a small parlor, cluttered with furniture from 40 years past, its windows open and a fire lit. A concession only an old woman would make. "Sit down. There is tea, and nothing to eat, for I have no cook worth the name. You have been walking my brother's hedges." "I have, my lady. And you have found that they have moved." Louisa set down her cup. "How long have you known?" "Since the summer of 14, said Lady Eustacia. "A thing I shall have to answer for, though not, thank God, to you." She settled back into her chair. "My brother was ill for 4 years before he died. Not in his body. He had a stroke in March of 13. A small one, that no one outside this house ever knew about. Afterwards, he could talk perfectly well. He could not read for more than 5 minutes at a time, without his eyes swimming. He was a proud, stupid, kindly man, and he would rather have been shot at noon in the marketplace than let anyone know it. So, Cawthorne read to him. Cawthorne read him his letters, his accounts, his leases, and in the end, Cawthorne put a pen in his hand and told him where to sign. And he signed, for what else was he to do? "The ring fence," Louisa said. "The ring fence, the new piece, the exchange of the 52 acres with the parish, which my brother believed was an exchange, because he was told it was an exchange." The old woman's mouth tightened to a line. "The parish was to have the 6 acres at Fetley Bottom in place of the common. Do you know what is at Fetley Bottom, Miss Marston? Rushes and a spring flood. Rushes and a spring flood, and a well that goes brackish in June." She lifted her chin. "I told him in this room in September of 14, I said, 'Ralph, the man is robbing you, and he is doing it with a pen while you sit there and let him.' And my brother said, 'I have had 3 years to think about this.' He said, 'Eustacia, if I open that, then everybody will know I have not read my own papers for 2 years. I will not have it said of me. He chose his dignity.' Lady Eustacia said, 'It cost 340 people a well. It cost your father his living. And it cost me my brother, because I did not speak to him again for a year and a half. And then he was dead.'" Louisa's cup was halfway to the table. She set it down without a sound. "What did it cost my father?" "You do not know. It was not a question." The old woman looked at her for a long moment, and something in the hard face softened a fraction. "No, he would not have told you. Men of that kind never do. My lady, what did it cost my father?" Cawthorne asked him in the spring of 13 to certify a line for the enclosure that ran east of the Ladywell Thorn, to sign his name to it as surveyor. "Your father came here on foot to ask whether it was my brother's wish. I could not get him past the door, and I was too proud to go out and speak to him on the step." She looked at the window. "He refused to sign. He was paid off for the estate work that Michaelmas There is not a landowner in 4 parishes who will employ a surveyor the Gravewend agent has dismissed. I imagine you know better than I do what your household was living on after that." Louisa sat with her hands in her lap. 16 months of it came back at her all at once. The house at the bottom of the hill given up. The good window. The instruments sold one by one, except the chain and the compass. Her father at the table at night, doing farm valuations at 4 shillings a time. The cough. The winter. And the way he had said, "There will be work in the spring, Lou." Every November for 4 years. "He never said a word," she said. "No, he let me think his eyes had gone." "He let you think nothing of the kind. Cawthorne let you think that. And he did it after the man was in the ground, which is the part I find I cannot forgive." Lady Eustacia leaned forward and laid one dry hand over Louisa's for precisely 2 seconds, then withdrew it and rang the bell. "You will want to be alone, and I do not permit crying in this room." Louisa reached the end of the lime avenue before she stopped. She stood in the shade, one hand braced against the trunk of the last tree, her face down. And she did not cry, because she had learned a long time ago what crying was worth. She thought of a man walking 6 miles on a spring morning to ask whether a thing was right, and then walking 6 miles back with the answer. The Duke of Wycliffe came down from the house on foot 20 minutes later, and that was where he found her. He stopped a little way off. "Miss Marston, you have been with my aunt." "I have, your grace." "Then you know about my uncle." He looked away down the avenue. "She told me the whole of it the day after I arrived. She waited until I had eaten, and then she took it out of a drawer and put it on the table in front of me, like a bill." Louisa looked away down the avenue, at the limes, and found she had nothing at all to say to that yet. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I would rather do it standing in a lane than in a room with a door, because in a room I shall make it sound better than it was." He put his hands behind his back. "For 4 days in August I was a man on a road. I had no money, no name that anybody would take, and nothing whatever to give in exchange for what I wanted. I want to say that it taught me humility." End quote. It did not. What I learned in 4 days is that I had spent 31 years being agreed with by everybody I met, and that I had mistaken that for being right. That is not nothing. It is very nearly nothing. It is the first useful thought I have ever had at 31, and I had to be refused water 11 times to have it. He looked at her then, straight. "And the 12th? I have thought a great deal about the 12th. Not because it was kind, because it was ordinary to you. You gave me the cup, and you told me the fall of the ground to the trough in feet. Then you went on down the hill with 2 cans on a yoke, and you did not look back at me once." "There was nothing to look back at. There was a man who was going to have to explain himself to you eventually," said the Duke, "and I have been dreading it since the 9th of August. Something happened in Louisa's chest, quite low down, that she chose not to examine. 'Your Grace,' she said, 'the survey is done. I have the field book, closed within 4 links, which is better than my father ever managed on that ground, and it shows the line 8 chains out. That proves where the hedge is now. It does not prove where it was. The award papers. The award papers.'" She made herself go on in her steady working voice, which was the only voice she had that was safe. "The commissioners have a copy of the 1812 survey, deposited with their clerk at Wenbury. Your uncle's estate has the other. If the 2 do not agree, then somebody has altered one of them, and that is a thing a man in a wig will look at. Then we shall have the estate's copy on the table tonight." They did not have it on the table that night. The estate copy lived in a japanned tin case in the muniment room at Gravewend. The sheets inside were a solid brick of grey pulp. Cawthorne stood at the Duke's elbow, looking very sorry, and explained about the gutter and the difficulty of getting a plumber out from Wenbury. "And this case has not been opened since the year 15. There has been no occasion, your grace." Louisa said nothing at all. She was looking at the dry dust on the shelf where the case had sat. There was a clean rectangle in it, and the case was standing an inch to the left of it. She told the Duke on the stairs, in 6 words. She watched his face change, and then she watched him put it away behind his eyes, like a man folding a letter. They went to Wenbury on the Wednesday, and they went separately, which was Louisa's idea. "If I am seen going into the clerk's office in your carriage," she said, "then whatever comes out of that office is what the Duke's young woman found. On Tilbrook's cart, it is what the surveyor's daughter found." So she went with Kit on the carrier's cart at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 miles, sitting on a crate of hens. Mr. Lydgate, clerk to the commissioners for the parish of Oakmere, was 45, precise, and entirely uninterested in the fact that a woman had walked into his office. He was interested in the fact that she had brought the correct fee in coin, knew the number of the parish under the Act, and asked to see the deposited counterpart by its proper name. "You may look at it," he said. "You may not take it out of this room, and you may not mark it. There is the table. There is the light." The counterpart came out of a deal box, 4 sheets tied with tape. Louisa laid them out. Sheet 1, the north of the parish. Sheet 2, the village and the church. Sheet 3, the west. Sheet 4, the east, with the new piece. She looked at sheet 4 for a long time. "Kit," she said, "come here. Put your hand flat on that sheet, and now on this one." He did it, frowning. "That one's smoother," he said. "Yes. And it's whiter." "Yes." Louisa carried the sheet to the window and held it up against the white September sky. "There is a thing in good paper called a watermark. You cannot see it flat on a table. You hold it to the light, and there it is, a wire pattern lying inside the sheet, a maker's name, and on English writing paper from about the year 10 onward, the year of manufacture. Her father had taught her to look for it, because a surveyor buys a great deal of paper and is cheated over most of it. Sheets 1, 2, and 3 carried the same mark and the same date, and the date was 1811. Sheet 4 said 1815. Louisa stood at the window with a piece of paper held up to the light. She understood the whole of it at once, the way a total comes up at the foot of a column. Here was a survey dated the year 12, deposited with the commissioner's clerk. And in it, one sheet only. The sheet with the new piece and the ladywell on it had been made out of paper that did not exist until 3 years after the survey was made. "Mr. Lydgate," she said, "how is a deposited counterpart amended?" "It is not amended. If a sheet is damaged, the surveyor or the agent may deposit a certified copy in its place, with a memorandum of substitution signed by him, entered in my book." "Is there such a memorandum in your book?" Mr. Lydgate looked at her over his spectacles for a moment. Then he got the book. There was the 14th of June in the year 15, sheet 4 of the survey of the parish of Oakhaven, the original being damaged by water, a true copy substituted this day, signed for the estate by its agent. "Would you make me a certified copy of that entry?" Louisa said. "And of the sheet?" "Both. I will pay for them now. That will be 12 shillings and 6 pence. "I know." She had brought 14 shillings, which was every coin in the house. She had decided on the cart at 6:30 that morning. Whatever this office gave her, it was not going to be paid for by a duke. It was in the yard of the Wycliffe Arms at Wenbury, waiting for Tilbrook to load, that Antonia Pentridge came out of the inn door in a bonnet with grey ribbons, and stopped in front of her. "Miss Marston, I am glad. I had meant to write, and writing is such a lie." "Miss Pentridge, I shall be quick, because your carrier is looking at us." Antonia had her gloves in her hand and was turning them over and over. "There is a school at Bath kept by a woman who was my governess. She wants a teacher of drawing and mathematics, and she will take my word for anybody. £40 a year, your own room, and no parish in it anywhere. I would rather you did not tell me you have too much pride to accept, because pride is very expensive, and I know exactly what it costs." Louisa looked at her. "You're asking me to leave Oakmere," Antonia said. "I'm asking you to be somewhere else, by September 29th. "Yes," Louisa replied, "because of the survey, because of you." For the first time, Antonia's practiced charm wavered, revealing not malice, but sheer exhaustion beneath. "He hasn't written to the paper, Miss Marston. Do you know what that means? It means he's a gentleman, and he'll let the matter lie rather than break me in public. That's all I have. I have a house with a tarpaulin for a roof, a mother who hasn't come downstairs since March, and a man who will marry me out of decency. And then you go up a hedge with a chain, and he carries the other end, and every soul in this county is talking about it. I did not. I know you did not. Antonia's hands trembled on her gloves. That's what makes it unanswerable. If you were angling for him, I could beat you in a week. You're not. You're simply there, being useful in the mud with your ridiculous compass, and he looks at you the way my father used to look at the barometer. She stopped, took a breath, and plastered the charm back onto her face, as another woman might don a bonnet. 40 pounds a year. Say yes. There was a pause. No, Louisa said. May I ask why not? Because on September 29th, a man in Wenbury signs a paper. It decides what my parish drinks for the next 100 years. And I am the only person alive who has walked that line 3 times. She spoke quietly. It's not about the Duke, Miss Pentridge. I know you won't believe that. It has never once been about the Duke. Antonia looked at her for a moment longer. No, she said. I don't believe it, but I think you do, and that's worse. She turned and went back into the inn. Cawthorne made his move on Friday. And he moved, as she had known he must, for the one soft spot she possessed. He arrived at the Duke's study at 9 in the morning, the folder tucked under his arm, and asked, with immense respect, to be allowed to raise a painful matter concerning the surveyor's daughter. He then laid on the desk a letter from the commissioner's clerk's office, dated April of 16, acknowledging receipt of the fair sheets for the parish of Oakmere Row, signed by the surveyor, N. Marston. His Grace will observe the date, Cawthorne said. Mr. Marston was buried in January. The sheets were delivered in April, in his hand and over his signature. I have said nothing of this to anyone for 18 months, out of regard for the family. The Duke sent for her at noon. He was standing by the window when she entered. The letter lay on the desk, turned to face her. He did not sit, nor did he offer her a chair, for he had understood by then that she preferred to face such things on her feet. Is it true? He said. Yes. Say it to me. All of it, in your own words, because I will not have it in Cawthorne's. I drew up the fair sheets of my father's survey in the March and April after he died, from his field book and mine. I signed his name to them. I took the second half of the fee. Louisa's voice was perfectly steady. £9 15. We had £2 9 in the house, and the quarter's rent owing. The work was done, and the work was honest, and no one on earth would have paid a penny of it to a woman of 21. I have never said it aloud until this minute. The room was very quiet. They can hang you for that, the Duke said. Forgery is a hanging matter, not for a signature on a map sheet. Transportation, more likely, and only if a man of substance took it up. She had thought about this for 16 months, in the small hours. It doesn't signify what they would do to me, Your Grace. What signifies is that it is the answer to everything I have found. Whatever I put in front of the commissioners now, the watermark, the memorandum, the humpy stone, Mr. Cawthorne will stand up and say, this comes from a woman who forged a surveyor's name for money. And every man in that room will nod and put it aside and sign the award. Then it must not come from you. There is no one else it can come from, Your Grace. It is my father's line and it is my field book. It can come from me. He came around the desk. I am the landowner. It is my survey, my agent, my case. You give me the field book and the copies. Your name is not in it anywhere. Cawthorne's letter goes on the fire this morning, and no living soul hears of it again. Say the word and it is done. And there it was, the whole of it offered in one sentence by a man who could actually do it. Louisa looked at the fire and thought of how simple her life would be at noon. No, she said. Miss Marston, if you carry it, it is a great man's quarrel with his agent, and it will be settled between great men, and the parish will be told what was decided. She lifted her head. And in 10 years, when somebody wants that well again, there will be no record anywhere that a single person in Oakmere ever stood up and said what was done to them. I will not be kept out of my own case, Your Grace. I have been kept out of everything else. He stood quite still. What will you do? I shall write to Mr. Lydgate this afternoon, said Louisa, and I shall tell him myself, before Mr. Cawthorne can, that the sheets deposited in April of 16 were drawn by me, that I set my father's name to them because no commissioner in England would take mine, that every line in them is true, and that I ask to be heard at Wenbury on the 29th of September. She swallowed once. A confession is only a weapon while it is a secret. After that, it is only a fact. The Duke of Wycliffe looked at her across his uncle's study for a long moment. You understand what it will cost you? I have been counting since April, she said. It is the only thing I am really good at. They walked the bounds on September 28th, a Saturday, something that had not been done in Oakmere since '98. Louisa had asked the churchwardens for it on the Monday, in the vestry, standing up, with her father's map on the table. A perambulation of the ancient bounds was the right of the parish. It required no duke, no commissioner, and no permission from any agent living. 40 people came at 7 in the morning. By 8, there were 90. They went out along the Ladywell Thorn, with the old men in front, because that is the order of these things. Louisa walked with the compass in her hand and the field book under her arm. Kit carried the arrows. The Duke of Wycliffe walked at the back, hat off, saying nothing at all, which she thought afterwards was the most intelligent thing he ever did. At the corner of the new piece, she stopped and put her heel on the turf. Here, she said. 2 men from Skelbrook put spades into the bank. Then the taller one got down on his knees in the loose earth and began to pull the soil away with his hands. The stone came up face down, as Kit had said it would. It was gray and rough, and about the size of a cottage hearthstone. When they turned it over, there was a cross cut into it, deep, worn, smooth in the arms, with a letter on either side. O to the west, W to the east. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then a very old man was helped forward, and everybody made way, because he was 81 and had been to 2 coronations. That's it, said Waplington. That's the mere stone. You know it? Louisa said. Know it? The old man's eyes were running the way old men's eyes do in a wind. I carried the hind chain when your father said it, miss. October, the year 12. It was raining, and I had a bad tooth, and he made me do the length twice. There's a chip out of the near shoulder, where the mason's boy dropped it off the cart, and if you feel under there, you'll find it. Louisa knelt down in the dirt in her mother's gray gown and put her fingers under the near shoulder of the stone. The chip was there. 90 people stood in a field on a Saturday morning and looked at a piece of gray rock, and the hedge stood 8 chains to the east of it, in the middle of what had been theirs. The commissioners sat at 11 the next morning in the long room of the Whitecliff Arms at Wenbury. 3 of them, with Mr. Lydgate at the end of the table, and his book open. The room held about 40. It held 60 that day. Louisa was heard forth, after the 5th question. When Mr. Lydgate read her name out, she stood and walked to the end of the table, through a room full of men. It was the hardest 12 feet she ever covered in her life. You are the daughter of Nathaniel Marston, surveyor, deceased, said the chairman. I am. Before I say anything about the line, sir, there is something the commission must have from me first, because it will be brought against me afterwards, and I would rather you had it from me. The chairman put down his pen. Go on. So she said it in that room, out loud, in a flat working voice that carried to the back, that the fair sheets deposited in April of 16 had been drawn by her hand, that she had set her father's name to them 3 months after he was buried, because she was 21 and a woman, and no commissioner in England would have taken hers, that the fee had been £9 15 shillings, and she had kept it and paid the rent with it, that every line, angle, and figure in those sheets was her father's work and her own, honestly taken in the field, and that she would stand on any yard of it, against any surveyor they cared to name. And I ask nothing on account of it, she finished. I ask only that the commission look at the paper before it decides what the paper is worth. There was a noise in the room that was not quite a murmur. Mr. Cawthorne rose from the second row, grave and sorry, and got as far as the word forgery. Sit down, Mr. Cawthorne, said the chairman. You will have your turn, and I begin to think you will want it. It took an hour and 10 minutes. The counterpart came out of the deal box and went up against the window. 3 commissioners, in turn, held sheet 4 to the light. They read 1815 in the wire of the paper and 1811 in the other 3. Mr. Lydgate read out the memorandum of substitution from his own book. Louisa's field book went round the table, closed, to within 4 links. Waplington swore to the stone, and to the chip on its near shoulder, and to the rain, and to the tooth. The Duke of Wycliffe was asked whether the estate wished to be heard. The estate wishes the commission to know that the exchange at Fetterby Bottom was represented to my uncle as a fair one, he said, and that my uncle was in no condition to read what he signed. That is the estate's whole case, sir. It does not ask for the 52 acres. It never had any right to them. Cawthorne was heard last. He was very good for 4 minutes, and then he stopped in the middle of a sentence about drainage, and stood looking at the table. He was 59. He had been agent at Graywend for 22 years, on £140 a year. And he had a son. It came out in the end, almost gently, because nobody in the room was enjoying it any longer. The son had been put into the wine trade at Bristol in the year 11, with money that was not Cawthorne's. The new piece had been let for grazing at £106 a year. The rent had gone to Bristol for 4 years. The ship went down off the Scillies in the year 15, with the whole of it, so he had moved a hedge to cover a hole, and then moved a sheet of paper to cover the hedge, and then spent 3 years covering the sheet of paper. He was to have been something, Cawthorne said to nobody in particular. That is all. He was to have been something. Then he sat down and put his hand over his mouth and was an old man in a good coat in a public room. Louisa found that she was not glad. She had expected to be glad. She stood at the end of the table and watched a man's whole life come apart in a room that smelled of beer and wet wool. What she felt was nearer to grief. She was never afterwards able to explain it to anybody. The commission sat until 4. The award for the parish of Oakmere was signed on the 29th of September, in the year 17, amended in 3 places. The line of the new piece was set back to the mere stone. 52 acres and the Ladywell were bequeathed to the parish in trust, meant for the inhabitants' use, with an everlasting right-of-way from the lane, and within the ledger of documents, penned in Mr. Lydgate's delicate script, lies an entry that anyone can inspect today. It's a survey and fare sheet of the said parish, meticulously undertaken by Nathaniel Marston, surveyor, and brought to completion and illustration by his daughter, Louisa Marston, whose name the commissioners recognized and whose testimony they accepted. This marks the very first time her name graces any official record. The rain arrived on the 8th of October, under the cloak of night, and continued its deluge for 2 days. Antonia Pentridge herself placed the notice of withdrawal in the county paper, in the same column, a mere 3 lines long. She offered no softening, no explanation. Louisa considered this the bravest act she witnessed that year, a sentiment she once confided in a letter, to which she received no reply, nor did she anticipate one. Cawthorne was dismissed, not prosecuted. The Duke wouldn't have it, and Louisa, it turned out, wouldn't either. He retreated to a sister in Ludlow. His son has since gone to Canada. Kit, at Michaelmas, was apprenticed to a parish surveyor of Oakmere for 7 years, receiving his bed, board, and £4 annually. The surveyor's name on the indenture is Louisa Marston. Mr. Lydgate secured her 3 parishes that winter, not many, but more than none. The Duke encountered her in the lane in November, on foot, his hat in his hand. She declined. Then, she said, "Ask me again in the spring, your grace. I have my own work yet to finish. And I will not come to you with an empty hand. Ask me when there is a sheet in the commissioner's box bearing my name in the corner, and I will give you my answer. It may well be the same answer, but it will be mine, and I will have earned the right to give it." He gazed at her for a long moment on the damp road. "That is the 3rd time you have made me wait," he said, "and I find I do not mind it at all." He asked her again on the 4th of April. The tin cup, with its dented side and a burn mark resembling a recumbent T, hangs today on a nail by the door at Graywend. A duchess placed it there. The staff have long since ceased inquiring about it. It is not displayed for admiration. Anyone approaching the drive with thirst may take it down and use it. That, in essence, is the entire tale. A woman offered a stranger half a pint of water because he was thirsty, asking nothing, expecting nothing, and continued on her way down the hill with her cans.